Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start the webinar in just about a minute. Just going to wait for some folks to catch up. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk today. I'm here to talk to you today about program learning outcomes, clarity, coherence, and impact. And I understand this is part of a webinar series with Kai. Um, I was able to do this last year. I had a presentation, so some of you might remember me. My name is Ryan Hartnett. I'm the Vice President for Membership here with the Middle States Commission for Higher Education. And as you probably know, we've been partnering Kai to bring you some, unique content and provide our Middle States perspective to what you're doing over there in Kurdistan. So. Thanks for having me today. I'm a longtime advocate for accreditation and assessment. I've been with the commission for a couple of years now, and I just really enjoy the work that I do, particularly working with new applicant and candidate institutions, but all of our member institutions, talking through program learning outcomes is honestly one of my favorite things to do. So I hope you enjoy. So today I'm going to explain the role of program learning outcomes. What are these program learning outcomes, or as we say, PLOs? And we're gonna get a lot of acronyms today, so just brace yourselves. But we're gonna evaluate the alignment between PLOs and other types of student learning outcomes. And right away, you should notice that a PLO or a program learning outcome is a type of student learning outcome. We're also going to align these and distinguish them from program educational objectives, which we see specifically mentioned in the KAAE standards, and talk about assessment and planning. We're going to apply our best practices for designing measurable and meaningful PLOs, and I'm going to talk to you about just how you would create good PLOs, what are some bad PLOs, what are some ways that we can measure whether we're meeting certain program learning outcomes, and how does that all work? So for before I begin, I want to start with a poll. I just want to get a quick poll of folks right now. So hopefully that poll should appear on your screen. How would you best describe the state of program learning outcomes at your institution? Are they well developed and mapped across the curriculum? Are they in development or partially developed? Or you're saying Bloom's taxonomy, what's a PLO? Let's see what folks have to say. Give that another minute. Make sure everybody gets their votes in. Go ahead and share the results. Okay, how would you best describe? Well developed and mapped. Ooh, I like that. So we've got some veterans here. In development, partially developed, and then we've got just 10% of you that are like, what the heck is a PLO? Okay, very good. Thank you. Um, So let's go with a brief review. Okay. So we're going to start with student learning outcomes. I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with regard to what are SLOs before we dive into PLOs. So our student learning outcomes are observable and measurable statements of student performance. They are using action verbs tied to knowledge, skills, and competencies, and they serve as building blocks for program learning outcomes. So you want to think of student learning outcomes, right? At the course level, those would be our building blocks from the program level. Student learning outcomes at the institutional level might be built out of student learning outcomes at the program level. And you're going to see how this plays out later on in my presentation. Thinking about a strong SLO, okay, it's going to use a clear action verb. And I'm going to show you some examples of clear action verbs in just a moment. It's going to include a specific content or skill. So at the end of this academic program, in this bachelor's degree, students or graduates will understand or know or demonstrate some specific skill or content within the curriculum. It's going to add context or conditions where applicable. And optionally, it's going to define the expected performance level. So we're going to say that, at the end of the program, our students are going to be experts. Are they going to be masters? Are they going to be competent? So we might also expect to see the performance level defined within the student learning outcome. When we're using Bloom's taxonomy, and Bloom's taxonomy is simply this thinking about lower and higher levels of knowledge and knowing and understanding. And you'll see at the remembrance level, at the early level for remembrance, this is kind of low level, right? So as you go down the list, we're going up actually in level. So we start with remember. So action verbs, example verbs might be just to define or list or identify. When we move up to understand, we might be asking our students to explain or describe or summarize. When we move up to the level of application, we'll be thinking about implementation, demonstration, and use. Analyze, compare, differentiate, critique, evaluate or judge, support, and justify. And then finally, create, design, construct, produce. Note that at each level, the required amount of expertise goes up, and that at the lowest level of just remembering and understanding that rote memorization, that could be really important foundational stuff for your curriculum. But at the end of your program, you may be better suited if your students can analyze, evaluate, and create. Think about some bad versus good SLOs. And again, this is more or less a review. Um, Here's some that need improvement. Students will understand leadership. Okay. It's kind of vague. We're not sure exactly what's being said. Students will know financial accounting principles. Well, what does it mean to know? And perhaps we can be more specific about this knowing. Students will gain knowledge of programming. Again, very vague, kind of not very measurable, right? How would we go about measuring that? Note the improved and measurable SLOs. Students will compare leadership styles and evaluate their effectiveness. This gives us more context. We understand a bit more about what we're asking our students to be able to do. Students will prepare and analyze basic financial statements, income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And now we've gotten very specific. We've gone beyond this kind of vague knowing financial accounting principles to actually doing something. Note that the verbs have changed. It's not knowing, which again is lower on Bloom's taxonomy. It's now we're asking our students to prepare and to analyze and do something beyond just rote memorization or just knowledge. And again, students will write a functional Python program with loops and functions. Notice that the verbs are much more active on the right-hand side. Compare, prepare, analyze, and write. Those verbs make it seem like the students are able to do something, and we're defining exactly what they're able to do. So here's the thing that people are always asking about, and I got a lot of questions ahead of this webinar. What are the differences between these course learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, and institutional learning outcomes? Okay. CLOs, PLOs, ILOs, too many, right? Too many LOs. We have so many. But really, truly, it's just a matter of level. There's nothing more than to this than at what level are we thinking about our student learning outcomes? Okay. Are we thinking about them at the course level, the program level, or the institution level? Now, in our middle state standards, we don't dive into course learning outcomes. Our standards say that institutions have to provide program learning outcomes. But many of our institutions will also demonstrate how they're evaluating their course learning outcomes in each and every course, how those appear in their syllabi, and so on and so forth. What's most important is if you're identifying program learning outcomes and you have student learning outcomes at the course level and you have institutional learning outcomes at the institution level, you have to show how these are related. These cannot just be isolated activities. Your course learning outcomes are going to feed into your program learning outcomes, which feed into your institutional learning outcomes. And we're going to talk a bit more about this in the second. And this is some of the higher level stuff that I want to get into today. But let's start with program learning outcomes first, so we really get a strong sense of what these are. They define what students know and can do, remember, can do, that action verb, in a program at graduation. Whether that's computer science or nursing or engineering, we're going to define what can our engineering baccalaureate students do when they complete their civil engineering curriculum. What can our nursing students know? What skills do they have when they are a graduate of our nursing program? Again, they are a species of SLO at the program level. And again, they must be measurable, observable, and student focused. They also must align with the program educational objectives. We're going to talk about this distinction in a moment. I think it's really important. So you've got, thrown a lot at you today. It seemed like we had a lot of experts on the poll. Um, but I want to make sure that we're really clear about this distinction between our program educational objectives and our program learning outcomes. So let's start with the program educational objectives. Now, these are part of, again, your KAAE standards. These are broad goals to be achieved, likely a few years after graduation. They're really very future focused. These would be aligned with your mission and your market stakeholder needs. And you're going to work with the folks that you have on the ground, your advisory boards, who would review your program educational objectives regularly. You would want them to be involved in all of this, really. But these are the folks that you could get data from to determine, hey, are we meeting our program educational objectives? And these folks are instrumental in creating them. So when we think about PEOs versus PLOs, okay? Your PEOs, we're thinking about something 3 to 5 years after graduation, could even be longer away, could be first year after graduation, but there's definitely what is the program objective? Why does this program actually exist? Well, a lot of the answer to that is so that students can launch into careers and have those professional achievements. And once again, these could be evaluated via alumni, employer surveys. We could be thinking about things that we want our students to be involved in. If they're graduating from nursing, are they in hospital settings, or what other types of clinical settings might they be in? You might want to decide that our program is geared towards psychiatric nurses or a specific type of nursing. You could find that out through those alumni employer surveys. Again, they're future oriented, but they're goals of the program. They're truly our program will do X. And they could be defined in such a way to say 95% of our students will land jobs in this sector. So this could be an educational, again, a goal of the program. Your PLOs, on the other hand, your program learning outcomes, these are things that students can do at the moment of graduation. They are based on skills, knowledge, and behaviors. They're evaluated via direct assessment and indirect assessment, like surveys, but mostly via direct assessment, and they're kind of part of the here and now. What's happening at our program right now. And of course, they are a species of student learning outcomes. Notice that one is focused on the program, goals of the program, and the other is focused on the students, the student learning outcomes. Got some sample program learning outcomes, some of which I found from your own institutions. So if some of these look familiar to you, it's because I stole them from your websites. So let's take a look at what you've come up with. So here's one for a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. Students will analyze financial, market, and operational data to develop evidence-based strategic recommendations for organizational success. That's really interesting. I think what's great about this program learning outcome is you get a higher level, right? Analyze. You get data, right? And evidence base, which of course we are all about as higher education institutions. And then it's going back to the organizational success. So it's something that's going to happen within the business, within the organization. So it's very practical, it's career oriented. Really like this program learning outcome. Masters of Science in Nursing, graduates will integrate advanced nursing knowledge, clinical judgment, and evidence-based practice to deliver safe, patient-centered care. Thinking about this one, graduates, notice you can use students or you can use graduates, right? Especially when we're talking about program learning outcomes, because that's really the level where we're at. So we're saying our graduates can integrate, they're taking what knowledge they know, that advanced nursing knowledge, their clinical judgment and evidence-based into patient-centered care. Similar to the last one, you have a higher level kind of on Bloom's taxonomy, thinking about integration. You're also showing what they are going to integrate, that clinical judgment, and clinical judgment is also at a higher level. So is this evidence-based practice. And that's all going into the workplace, right? So you see this real, very clear idea between the action verb, what the students are going to be able to do, and the workplace. Bachelors of Science in Engineering. Students will design safe and sustainable civil infrastructure systems. This one's a bit shorter and to the point, but it clearly says that students will design. And again, design is kind of midway, right? Well, actually, it's high level because it's kind of like a creation, right? They're designing safe and sustainable civil infrastructure systems. Um, there's something once again about what students are going to be doing out there in the world, and that connection back to a higher order of thinking. Here's just a few sample PEOs. I put them all on one slide because I didn't want to get bogged down with the PEOs. But you can see how these are different. And I try to keep them more general. I try to keep them more general so that you get a sense of program educational objectives that are, um, could someone might say, is that a PLO or a PEO? So I wanted to show you. Advance into licensed or senior engineering roles contributing to infrastructure, industry, or energy development. Graduates of the program will advance into licensure, engineering roles. See that the goal here is much more specific. It almost gives you a reason for why the program exists. It's less about what the students are learning or doing and more about what graduates of the programs will do later on. Okay. And again, landing those kinds of roles. Graduate of the program will drive organizational performance using data analytics and strategic decision making. Graduates of the program will assume leadership or specialized practice roles within healthcare systems. Again, this is very program oriented. Um, not all programs will say we want the students to assume leadership or to take on senior engineering roles. This is something specific to the program that the program wants to be able to do. Now let's get to institutional learning outcomes, okay? Again, a species of student learning outcomes. So don't get too caught up in, oh, are they different? How are they They're really just different in their broadness, their specificity, and where they land. So your institutional learning outcomes, what outcomes do you want for everyone at your institution? So you may have, say you have 25 academic programs. Each of those academic programs will have program learning outcomes. They will all then hopefully feed into your institutional learning outcomes. Now, not all institutions do this here. I know here in the United States, not all institutions have institutional learning outcomes, but most do, and it really is a best practice. And we're thinking about what are your broad competencies that are expected of all graduates? How should all of our students, what are the skills and knowledges that our students should all have when they leave the institution? These should really be reflective of your institutional mission and your strategic priorities. And those really are unique to your school, your institution, your mission. This is not a matter of, some other college's mission. This is our mission, our strategic priorities. What are the things that we want our students to be able to do? Note some examples here: communication, ethics, research capacity, global engagement. And these are examples I took from your institutions. Institutional learning outcomes are broad based, and they really tell the world that graduates from our university are engaged with the larger global society, are doing have the capacity to do quality research, can communicate effectively, both written and oral communication, saying something to the world about all of your graduates. Came up here with some sample institutional level learning outcomes once again. Here's one that kind of gets into critical inquiry and analytical reasoning. Perhaps that's a goal. Maybe it aligns with your mission. You want to produce critical thinkers. My background is in philosophy. That's where I started. So this one is always near and dear to my heart. And I always felt I could help the institution with this, particularly in my critical thinking courses. Graduates will demonstrate the ability to analyze complex problems, evaluate evidence from multiple sources, and construct well-reasoned, data-informed conclusions. Really like this institutional level outcome. This is great. Note that there's nothing discipline specific here, nothing program specific. Your nurses, your engineers, your computer scientists, your business students, they'll all be able to analyze complex problems, evaluate evidence from multiple sources, and construct well-reasoned, data-informed conclusions because those things matter for all of those disciplines. Again, this is an institutional level outcome that will cut across your program learning level outcomes. Here's one for ethics and civic responsibility. Graduates will demonstrate ethical reasoning, intercultural competence, and the ability to engage responsibly in local, national, and global communities. So really defining, what our graduates are going to be able to do. Note the local, national, and global. And so when you've got an institutional learning outcome like this, you're thinking on your own program level, well, I'm running a business program or I'm running my engineering program. How am I going to incorporate this ILO of ethics and civil responsibility into my PLOs? Well, my PLOs are going to have to speak about the local, the national, and the global. Those are going to have to be things that are out there in my program and built right into the program curriculum. So that when my students graduate, I know that the engineering students, the business students, the nursing students, they all have achieved this ability to engage responsibly in these various communities. That could be a tall task. Effective communication, one more institutional level outcome. Graduates will communicate ideas clearly and persuasively in written, oral and digital formats for diverse audiences and purposes, right? And again, that communication, effective communication, is so important in any walk of life. It doesn't matter if you're going to be, a computer scientist or a politician. You still need to express your ideas, right? Written and oral and digital formats, diverse audiences and purposes. So once again, there's nothing discipline specific, nothing program specific. This is something we could want for all of our students at the university to have this kind of institutional level outcome. We're going to come back to this a little bit. So we talked about mission. We talked a little bit about ILOs, right? Your institutional learning outcomes, your program educational objectives, your program learning outcomes. I glossed over a little bit on the CLOs, and we'll come back to those, but those are going to be course level and specific within each faculty member's course. So those would be, and they may map up to the program learning outcomes. And I'll show you that mapping in a moment too. And then the last two is really what we need to get into, the assessment part and the planning and the budget and how does this all work? And what does it do for us? Why are we going through all of this? So first of all, let's think about that mapping, okay? So I'm thinking about an institution, might be one of your institutions, that has an institution-wide skill, an ILO, that everybody's going to maintain, right? And then we're thinking about a PLO or a mechanical engineering. We're going to use mechanical engineering specific application of that skill. So starting with the highest level, then the program level, and then finally a course level measurable performance of that skill. So almost starting from the top, right? What are our institution-wide skills? What are our program level skills? Hey, how does my course fit into this, right? The course that I'm teaching, how does my course that I'm teaching fit into this? So I wrote them out for you. Now, this is more than you should ever put on a PowerPoint screen. So I'm sure my communications team will scold me afterward. But here's our institutional learning outcome at the top. Analyze complex problems using quantitative reasoning and evidence-based approaches. So you're analyzing complex problems using quantitative reasoning and evidence-based approaches. This one's really nice for, an engineering because it fits, it's tidy. You may struggle to show how your English majors are able to analyze complex problems using quantitative reasoning, but I think our engineers will do just fine. So that's your institutional learning outcome. At the program level, you might apply principles of engineering science to design, model, and evaluate mechanical systems that meet specified requirements and constraints. Note that this is about engineering science to design. It's more specific to the mechanical engineering department and program, um, but it's a programmatic goal. This is what we want all of our engineering students to be able to graduate with. And then all students at the university are going to have quantitative reasoning. All of our engineering students are going to be able to design, model, and evaluate mechanical systems. Well, I'm a faculty member and I'm teaching thermodynamics 101. And I'm like, okay, well, we've got this program goal about design, modeling, and mechanical systems. Let's take one of those systems and make sure that my course level outcome kind of feeds into that. And here I'd come up with calculate energy balances for closed and open systems and evaluate system performance using the first law of thermodynamics. Woo, that is very specific. Now we're really right down into the weeds. You can certainly know that you have a faculty member who wrote this and is thinking very critically about my particular course and what I want my students to be able to do. But this skill, the ability to calculate these energy balances, is an example of applying principles of engineering science to design, which is also an example of quantitative reasoning. So all of these fit together. I hope that's a tidy example that helps you think through this. In addition, Okay, you're mapping those PLOs, ILOs, CLOs, if you have CLOs. Then you're mapping where each PLO is going to be taught throughout the curriculum. This is also referred to as curriculum mapping. And this is where you'll hear folks talk about their curriculum matrices, how things are mapped across a curriculum. We're going to map each program learning outcome. We're going to find out where is it introduced, reinforced, and mastered. So if we go back to this slide, for example, say we have this applying principles of engineering science to design. Maybe we're introducing that in our thermodynamics class. Okay. So we would say thermodynamics 101. And if we were creating our matrix, we would say I introduced. And then later in thermodynamics 2, it's being reinforced. And then possibly finally in a senior level mechanical engineering course where they're working on their final project, we can show that that engineering science to design modeling has been mastered. So we want to be able to demonstrate in the curriculum where the PLOs are being brought up, where they're being introduced, where they're being reinforced, where they're being mastered. We want this mapping is so important. It can be very revealing, especially when you're getting faculty together across disciplines to think critically about how are we going to make sure that our students are meeting our program learning outcomes. Well, you teach these three courses, I teach these two, and we've got adjunct faculty teaching these 10 other courses. How are we supposed to pull all of this together? Well, the curriculum mapping is really the way to do it. You can identify, well, Professor so and so is already hitting these things, already introducing the concepts in their thermodynamics class. Maybe I don't need to introduce those curricula in my class because it's already being covered there. Or it could be the case that everybody's kind of reinforcing the same things and not getting into some other elements of the program learning outcomes that might be more beneficial. So the mapping is really important. It shows you clearly where you might have some gaps and redundancies. It also ensures this progressive skill development. So at the 100 level, students are being introduced to these skills and concepts. At the 200 and 300 level, they're being reinforced. And finally, at the 400 or senior level, or maybe the master's degree level, you can see that they have mastery of that particular program learning outcome. And that's really good too, because you have those connections between the courses. So if I'm teaching a sequential course, I can go back and say, hey, my students are coming in, but they haven't really been introduced to this skill yet. Maybe it's important that we introduce this skill earlier on because I'm going to really be reinforcing it in this later course. What this mapping does for your institution it can't just be measured in the good that it does for your students. The faculty dialogue and program review that results is excellent. This is a great way to start a conversation with faculty. How do I do X? What are you doing in your area? It opens up these conversations, these siloed people who may not talk to each other all the time, and gets them talking about the thing they love the most, their curriculum, right? The things that they want to be able to teach and do. How does my curriculum relate to the overall program? How do my courses interact with your courses? And it's just an excellent way to get faculty talking. Some other benefits, I mentioned it strengthens alignment, it improves the student learning, it enhances assessment quality. Absolutely, because we are seeing the assessment at multiple levels. And then, of course, it supports strategic planning and accreditation, very importantly, too. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the planning aspect of all assessment, but it really cycles back. If we go through our program learning, our curriculum mapping exercises, and we see that something is missing, maybe this is an area that we need to bring to administration. Perhaps it's essential research or library skills, and we do not have the right information resources in our library. Maybe they don't have the right access to the correct journals that they need. Maybe there's a gap that's so big that, hey, we need to hire a faculty member. Notice too, in my examples, there's a curriculum mapping and assessment, but also a realization that this has to be tied back to the overall goals of the institution, our overall strategy, and importantly, to resource allocation and to decisions about our budgeting. So, budgets, and it could even flow the opposite way through a mapping and assessment process. You might find out, hey, maybe we are too heavy in this particular area. Maybe there are redundancies, and so there are some areas we could cut back. So you've got this kind of assessment, planning, and closing the loop. When thinking about your planning and your assessment, you want to have both direct and indirect measures aligned to each program learning outcome. So you want to be your direct measurement of the program learning outcomes can take place at the course level. It can also take place at the program level. So both of those are direct measures of program learning outcomes. You might, at the course level, you might be measuring something more specific, but you've already mapped it to the program level. You know that that course level outcome is really all about the program level, like we saw in our engineering example with thermodynamics. We know that what I'm teaching in that course is going to really help them with their applying. It's part of engineering design. So that would be direct assessment when we're thinking about what have they done in the course and what have they done in the program. To do direct assessment, that direct assessment, we have to collect artifacts. And we can get into this maybe at a later time, but the collection of artifacts and the actual analysis is the most important thing when we're thinking about how our students are actually achieving what we're saying they're achieving. So if our program learning outcome is, that students will communicate effectively in written and oral formats to present business presentations. And then we get to the end of the curriculum and we have a senior level course and we do our outcomes assessment. Maybe we look at artifacts, we look at each individual student presentation. We decide, hey, these students aren't making the grade. They are not, their presentations are no good. We've scored them on rubrics. We've collected artifacts over the last 3 years. And in fact, we've seen a decline. So now let's go back and change something in the curriculum. And again, that's that example of closing the loop, going back to readjust and making adjustments based on what we discover. An indirect measure of that presentation might be one of those program educational objectives too. The thing that, when we're talking to our advisory council, some of those surveys that we send out to those folks, hey, were our graduates able to provide presentations to your clients? That could be an indirect measure, right? So a direct measure is going to go right into the specific outcome and directly measure it. We're going to collect evidence and artifacts based on the specific program learning outcome. An indirect measure could be a survey, student satisfaction, where students get jobs. Those are all indirect because they may not tell us specifically about the outcome, but they give us some good clues. I want to emphasize regular review cycles. Okay. This is both a blessing and a curse because you've got to do regular review, but the blessing here is you don't have to analyze or collect data for all your student learning outcomes at once. In fact, I think, especially if we're thinking about course level outcomes, that could be a really daunting task to try to be constantly collecting data and analyzing every single outcome every semester. And frankly, that could burn faculty out. It could certainly burn out the administration. So it's a really good idea to think about some regular review cycles. So suppose our engineering program has 4 program learning outcomes. And then in the courses, there's all lots of different maybe close to 100 course level outcomes that have been identified throughout all the courses. At that program learning outcome level, when you have those 4, you might consider thinking about how we're going to evaluate those. Are we going to look at those every year, or just maybe year 1, we look at program learning 1. Maybe year 2, we look at a different outcome. Year 3, we look at it, and then we cycle back. And then again, too, at the course level, you might cycle through certain courses that have more specific things to do with the program learning outcomes. We want to document all of our improvements, okay? So important that we're documenting our improvements along the way. What are we doing better at the course level based on our assessment of student learning? What are we doing at the program level that's better? And then in the total results, right, in those indirect measures, are our students doing better? Are they graduating at a greater rate? Are they getting better jobs? Those could all be examples of documentation of improvement actions. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we're integrating our findings. We're taking what we learn from our assessment planning, from our mapping, and when we're closing the loop, we're going back to our strategic planning and we're thinking through what are the kinds of things we can spend some money on or not spend some money on, where should we direct our gaze and our faculty. Um, so much here is it's so important. Obviously, we want to think about at the highest level how we're achieving all of our main strategies and tactics. But when we're thinking about program learning outcomes, student learning outcomes, institutional learning outcomes, they're really so intimately tied. And for many institutions, the educational program is the foundation or the heart of what you're doing. It is the heart of the enterprise, right? We all wouldn't be here if it wasn't to educate students, okay? All of these other parts of the planning, building buildings and getting more donors and maybe expanding to a new region, or it's all about education and providing the best educational experience that we can possibly have. So, what better way to think about an institution's overall strategy and mission, but through the lens of how well it achieves its program learning outcomes and its institutional level learning outcomes? Because if our students aren't achieving those, then maybe all the planning and the budgeting and the things that maybe we're not we're not aimed in the right direction. So we want to make sure that we're taking this evidence, the things that we learn through these processes, and bringing it back to that strategy. And I know many of you joined Terrence last week to talk about that mission and strategy alignment. This is one more piece to the puzzle to bring into that strategy and mission alignment. The assessment cycle. So, always with the cycle, we're going to define our outcomes. We're going to find out what they are. We're going to measure them, right? We're going to say our students either meet them or they don't meet them. They understand the rules, the laws of thermodynamics, or they don't. We're going to analyze those results, and then we're going to make an improvement. We're going to figure out what are we going to do better. We're going to use both direct and indirect methods when we're doing this measurement. And great idea, we're going to integrate external benchmarks and peer comparisons. So oftentimes our benchmark setting is based on what we've done last semester, maybe the semester before. We can also benchmark externally against standardized exams, and we could benchmark against our colleagues. That's always a possibility as well. So I'm going to take some questions and answers, and I got a lot of questions before this presentation, so I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. Um, but I want to just give you some summary and key takeaways. So we're thinking about you want to align your programs with institutional mission and industry needs. And that's really what program learning outcomes, the assessment of, the collection of artifacts, and doing all of this hard work is all about. You're going to write measurable, student-focused program learning outcomes. And I hope that you learn more about how one would go about that, some good examples of those program learning outcomes and how you would write those. And I hope you've gotten some good examples of assessing those outcomes for the continuous improvement, and quality of your institution. You want to continuously get better and better and better through the program learning outcome assessment model. So I am going to start with some questions that I received. And then maybe I'll be daring enough to go right into the chat too. So here's one here. So how can faculty be effectively engaged in the design and assessment of program learning outcomes. I think there's kind of a two-part to this, right? So they have to be kind of in line with the program, right? The thing that you're trying to produce. They got to make sure that their course level outcomes align with the program learning outcomes, that they're basically on the same page. And that they're producing assessment results and assessment reports, for example, that are in keeping or in line with your review cycles and your procedures. So, number one, they got to play by the rules. Okay. That's how they can be effective. Number two is they need to be motivated to do this work. And I don't think this could be undersold. Talk about resource allocation at your institution. Talk about how programs can benefit from the collection of data, from the collection of evidences based on student learning and institutional outcomes. Talk to them about how their lives could be better if their programs produced a higher level of graduate, a more prestigious academic program. There are tangible benefits to doing student learning outcomes for our faculty. And I think, there are plenty of examples, but I know faculty motivation can be tricky. So it's a great question. You want to keep them effectively engaged, talk to them about the money, talk to them about the resources, talk to them about their graduates, the quality of their programs, where their graduates are getting jobs, tie it all back, make it all real for them. And hopefully they will understand that this process is, in fact, an important one. Um, what is the role of program learning outcomes in ensuring curriculum alignment with professional and societal needs? I think I hopefully answered a lot of that question here, thinking about that curriculum alignment. Because we want to survey folks on the outside. We want to look at those indirect measures and make sure that those are influencing, what our program learning outcomes are going to be, and also what our institutional learning outcomes are going to be. Um, if you go out, you could say, for example, our program has taught students this great skill, but then when we go out into the world and we ask the employers about it, uh, they don't confirm it, right? They say, well, I haven't seen them be able to communicate effectively in an oral presentation or be able to do a deep analysis of a statistical data set. And when I've asked them to do this in the job, they were unable to do that. So again, that kind of like feedback is really important. And then you can go back into your program learning outcomes and readjust. You could think about, hey, maybe we're missing something. Go look at that curriculum map. Maybe there's a gap somewhere along the way where they're not getting enough data analysis or real statistics or a specific mathematical skill that would enable them to do their job. Again, it's all about tying back to what does the employer need? What does society need? What kind of graduates do we want to produce? It's all so intimately tied together. All right. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment. I think that will work, and I'm gonna take a look at some of our questions in the Q&A. I try to answer many of our questions. Um, how to relate job market hiring and employment to the PLOs? I think I just covered that a bit. Great question. How can we relate all the outcomes or how to map them? SLO, SL, CLO. Okay. It's going to look large, Ahmed. It's going to be a big, it's going to be a big task. Okay. So again, hopefully you learned today that your SLOs are really a kind of a general category. Your ILOs, PLOs, CLOs, right? Those are all mapped up together and work together. Those are the ones that you would say, here's what we have at the course level, here's what we have at the program, here's what we have at the institution. Now, is there going to be a direct fit for every course level outcome that every one of your no. Okay. You're not going to find it at any institution. There's going to be some material that's taught in so and so's course in ancient Greek philosophy that doesn't cover anything that you want to do with your institution wide outcomes. Okay. So don't feel like, okay, if there's something missing at the course level, we failed, or if there's something introduced at the course level that it's not, it's not for good. Sometimes obviously our faculty need their academic freedom too. But when we're thinking about that alignment, we're thinking about those institutional learning outcomes, you really want to make sure that the majority, certainly your program learning outcomes, all relate to the institutional learning outcomes. Your institutional learning outcomes should be broad enough, like in the examples I provided, that they could relate to any discipline of study, whether that's being civically engaged or an ethical human being or effectively communicating or thinking critically. These are very broad ideas. And truly, as I mentioned before, any one of your majors should be able to kind of share in that critical thinking or communication for nurses, communication for engineers. Truly, that apply cuts across the curriculum. So the relation, how do we become better communicators in our engineering curriculum? Well, we're going to have to come up with some program learning outcomes, at least one, and that deals with that communication piece, if communication is a goal of the institution. So that's kind of one example. I would say your PEOs are very much, they sit kind of on the side of this, right? So if I'm thinking about ILOs, PLOs, and CLOs, I would put my PEOs right here next to my PLOs. So your program learning outcomes, remember I showed you the slide, it's about the here and now and what our graduates can do. Well, our program objectives, why this program exists, is so that students can work in this field or do this thing. So those are going to be a lagging, right? We're going to be a lagging statistic. We're going to get more of those as we go. Those program educational objectives and whether we're meeting them or not can influence our program learning outcomes. So I know it's a lot, and I understand there's a lot of acronyms being thrown at you, but know that there's a lot of material. Beyond this webinar, you could find a lot of material on the internet. Do some Google searches. You'll find evidence of this kind of mapping and relation of all these outcomes, aplenty out there. How often are learning outcomes reviewed? I did cover that toward the end of my presentation, Deline. And I do believe, it does depend on the institution. You want to do it regularly. No matter what, it has to be done regularly. So you can't just, well, we did it this year and we spent, took 10 years off and didn't do it again. We always want our outcomes assessment to be periodic, not episodic. So you want it to be always every 4 years, we look at program learning outcome number one. Every 2 years, we look at half of the program learning outcomes. And in the second year, we look at the other half. So it could be annually for your institution. We're going to look at them every year. However it goes, just make sure that it's done regularly and periodically, not just, well, KAAE is coming for an evaluation. We better look at all our outcomes now. Okay, we don't want to be rushed. We don't want to be doing this as just sort of a last minute thing. This should be part of a flow. This should be something that we understand. It's a plan. Everybody knows the plan. We didn't talk as much about, on-campus engagement, but having some place where faculty and deans and provosts and folks at the institution can all go and share student learning outcome information is so vital. Having that place where people can go and see what other faculty are doing, and there you could keep, here's our schedule. So everybody knows that, oh, in the math department, they're looking at these outcomes this year. And over there in engineering, they're looking at these outcomes this year. So I think that's a really great question. How often? The answer is truly up to the institution, but just make sure that it's not episodic. Also, are stakeholders involved in reviewing outcomes? Absolutely. If you're meeting with your advisory board for your program, share your outcomes. They may have great ideas about what those outcomes are. And students absolutely need to be aware of student learning outcomes. It's about them. They should really be stated in program materials, in your catalog, your math program, your engineering, your nursing program. It will state these are the program learning outcomes for nursing. These are what we want everyone to be able to do. So students should be able to interact with learning outcomes throughout, even before they become a student. So when they're looking through their materials, when they're thinking about becoming a student, and then throughout the curriculum, those course level outcomes and the program learning outcomes can be stated right in the syllabi. And one really good practice for alignment, by the way, is to put both the course level outcomes and the program level outcome or outcomes that that particular course maps onto. So that the students see, okay, these are the course level outcomes. These are the things I'm achieving today in this course. Oh, and here is the thing that I'm achieving overall in the program by taking this course. That's a really clear way to demonstrate to your students what you're doing. How can we make program learning outcomes visible and valuable to students? It looks like I just answered that, Jamal. Um, is there any certification? No, that's not for me. To what extent? Yeah, changes can be made on previous assessment results. Delina, I'm telling you, you can blow it all up. Changes need to be made based on previous assessment results. And changes to the outcomes themselves is also possible. Maybe the outcome is simply not achievable. Or maybe your institution has had a mission shift that really has only been discovered through the process of outcomes assessment. There's lots of possibilities here, but 100%, we want to try to make changes based on the results that we're receiving. That's what quality, continuous improvement is all about. That's how you enhance your institution and you tell the world, we are an institution that doesn't just sit back. We haven't just created a curriculum that we teach. We have created a curriculum that lives, that breathes. Our students' results, the jobs that they're getting, the results on their presentations, the direct results of student learning, it all affects our curriculum in a profound way. So, again, change based on assessment. Don't do assessment if you're not interested in change. Assessment is all about change and improvement and getting better. No institution is perfect. No program is perfect. No course is perfect. We can always get better, and that's kind of the idea. Beyond simply mandating this work, what specific institutional rewards and support structures? So I'll get into this a little bit more. So I talked about promise of resource allocation. Certainly, whenever you're getting this stuff going, celebrate your successes. You're bringing folks together on campus. They're having these dialogues about their curriculum maps, about their programs, about their course learning outcomes. Celebrate that, right? Have a party, throw a celebration, honor a faculty member who does a really good job. I always like to take my champions, my faculty I was a provost for 10 years. So I led faculty and I was a dean for another 5 years before that. So 15 years I led faculty. Keep them motivated, give them little rewards, but think about your champions first. Who are your first adopters? Who are the folks that are going to get into this right away? Those folks will also be such a tool and resource for you because they can present to everybody else. And they can sell this to the rest of your faculty when you're not even around. So make sure you're seeding these ideas with your champions. Get a small group of faculty together. Start doing the work with those faculty, and eventually it will spread. How many learning outcomes are allowed or standardized? It really all depends. I like to see for an institutional level, maybe five is good, somewhere around there, 3 to 5. For a program level, they could be much larger list, maybe 5 to 10 at the program level. Some programs might only have three. And at the course level, you might get between 3 and 15 course learning outcomes in each course. So that ends up becoming a lot of outcomes. um, so we have course, then department, college. Do we need to have outcomes at all these levels? You don't need to. You don't necessarily have to, Ahmed, but it's not a bad practice and not a bad idea at all. Um, All right. Well, I have hit my time. Thank you so much for your attentiveness today. Some really wonderful questions. Who knows? Maybe I'll be back again for another session with you all. I always enjoy these. So have a wonderful rest of your evening. For those of you on the other part of the world, I will see you soon. Take care.